3 antique keys, an aging leather folder, and a forgotten legal clause supposedly turned an ordinary family meeting into an extraordinary royal confrontation. According to a dramatic account, Queen Camilla's family had spent years believing that a magnificent private estate would eventually become part of their future. Then, Prince William allegedly arrived with lawyers and documents suggesting something completely different. They had never possessed a legal claim to it at all. But the biggest twist wasn't who supposedly lost the property. It was what William allegedly decided to do with his own position once the paperwork was finally examined. The estate in this story is called Ravensmere, described as thousands of acres surrounding an historic manor, working farms, cottages, and valuable collections. For years, the narrative claims, Camilla's relatives were treated as though their future connection to the property was practically settled. Rooms were allegedly discussed for their use, renovations considered, and long-term plans imagined. Yet there is a major problem with taking these details literally. The supplied account does not provide independently authenticated property records establishing Ravensmere or these arrangements. Within the narrative, however, informal family assurances gradually became mistaken for something much stronger legal ownership. King Charles is portrayed as central to that misunderstanding. According to the story, he had privately reassured Camilla that the estate would remain available to her family. Those alleged conversations cannot be independently verified here, but they create the conflict that drives everything afterward. A personal promise can carry enormous emotional weight, particularly when it comes from a monarch. Legally, however, permission to enjoy a property during someone's lifetime can be very different from the right to inherit it permanently. The story claims that distinction had been sitting unnoticed inside old estate paperwork for decades, waiting for someone to actually read it. William supposedly discovered that Charles did not possess unlimited power to determine the estate's future. The narrative describes Charles as holding something comparable to a life interest, extensive use of the property during his lifetime, without unrestricted authority to transfer permanent ownership outside a specified family line. That is a precise legal claim for which the supplied story does not provide authenticated trust documents. Nevertheless, it gives the narrative its central dilemma. Charles may supposedly have believed he could promise Ravensmere's future, while older paperwork allegedly placed boundaries around decisions that even the reigning monarch could not simply override through private assurances. Then comes the story's historical twist. The account claims an important amendment was signed in 1999 by the Queen Mother alongside Princess Margaret, years before Charles married Camilla. According to the narrative, its purpose was to prevent spouses and descendants outside a defined bloodline from obtaining permanent ownership or control of the estate. This alleged document has not been independently authenticated in the supplied material, so its wording should not be treated as established royal history. But as a storytelling device, it completely changes the conflict. The restrictions supposedly existed before Camilla officially became Charles's wife. The narrative portrays Charles as discovering that years of informal promises could not overcome the alleged settlement. It even claims alternative arrangements were explored, including a new trust and an unusually long lease that would have allowed Camilla's relatives extensive use without transferring formal title. According to the story, William rejected both approaches because the existing terms required broader trustee approval. Again, these negotiations are unverified, yet they illustrate the larger theme perfectly. Legal documents are designed precisely for moments when personal expectations collide with institutional rules. A promise may explain someone's expectations, but it does not automatically rewrite an existing agreement. If you're enjoying this royal family story, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because this is where the alleged dispute becomes much more serious. The narrative claims William noticed unusual estate expenses after contractors conducted surveys and plans were developed for future residential changes. It even attributes specific costs and furniture orders to those preparations, though no authenticated invoices are provided here. According to the story, that changed William's concern entirely. He was no longer examining only who might eventually live at Ravensmere. He was supposedly questioning whether estate resources were already being used in anticipation of an inheritance that legally might never happen. The account describes William as responding less like an angry son and more like someone responsible for protecting a trust. Rather than confronting Camilla immediately, he supposedly requested financial records, occupancy documents, and historical amendments. That methodical approach is crucial to the narrative. If trust resources had genuinely been used for unauthorized private preparations, trustees could potentially have responsibilities to investigate, but whether that happened here is not established by the supplied evidence. Still, the story creates an effective contrast. While others allegedly relied upon years of conversations and expectations, William's supposed position rested on one question: what did the documents actually permit? Eventually, the story places everyone around the same table: William, Charles, Camilla, members of her family, and royal legal advisors. William allegedly delivers the devastating message that Camilla's children had never been beneficiaries of the estate. The exact meeting and quotation remain unverified, but the wording explains why the moment is presented as so powerful. Saying someone has lost an inheritance implies they once possessed a legitimate claim. Saying they were never beneficiaries suggests the expectation itself had been mistaken from the beginning. Suddenly, years of room planning, renovations, and family conversations supposedly carried emotional meaning, but no permanent legal authority. Camilla's side of the argument is portrayed as straightforward: nothing had actually been transferred, renovations remained preliminary, and Charles had repeatedly encouraged the family's future connection to Ravensmere. Within the story, those points explain why her relatives believed their expectations were reasonable. William's alleged response, however, separates assurances from ownership. This is perhaps the most useful distinction in the entire narrative. Families frequently discuss future plans informally, but property rights depend on actual legal arrangements. Without authenticated documents, we cannot know whether this royal confrontation happened, yet the principle remains clear: expectations become dangerous when everyone assumes somebody else has already checked the paperwork. Then, William allegedly makes the decision nobody expects. Rather than fighting to secure Ravensmere for himself, the story claims he renounced his own potential benefit under the arrangement. This supposedly triggered another succession mechanism, requiring advisors to determine who could legally receive the estate next. The narrative cycles through several senior royals before arriving at Prince Edward. These specific succession provisions are unsupported by authenticated settlement documents in the supplied material. Nevertheless, the twist changes William's motivation completely. If he was willing to surrender his own benefit, his actions could no longer easily be portrayed as an attempt to seize the estate for personal gain. Prince Edward's alleged response provides the story's biggest reversal. According to the account, he accepted the estate only under an arrangement designed to direct much of its benefit toward charitable purposes, including support for veterans, bereaved families, and young people leaving foster care. There is no evidence supplied confirming such a Ravensmere charity arrangement, so viewers should understand this as part of the narrative rather than an official announcement. Symbolically, however, it is extremely effective. The dispute begins with competing expectations over who might personally enjoy an enormous property, and ends with the property supposedly being redirected toward people outside the royal household. That decision also transforms the alleged public relations battle. If Edward had simply become the private owner of a magnificent estate, Critics could easily have framed the entire dispute as one branch of the royal family defeating another for personal advantage. But the story claims the charitable arrangement removed much of that argument. William supposedly gained nothing personally, while Edward restricted his own private benefit. Whether this happened is unverified, but the narrative makes a broader point about power. Sometimes the strongest way to demonstrate that a decision isn't motivated by greed is to surrender the financial reward attached to winning. And then there are the three keys. According to the account, William eventually placed them into the hands of representatives responsible for the estate's new arrangement. Rooms supposedly prepared for Camilla's relatives returned to estate control, and personal plans were halted. The story even describes a simple note attributed to Edward expressing that the house should serve people who genuinely needed it. Those details remain unconfirmed. Yet the symbolism is unmistakable. The keys represent more than access to rooms. They represent the difference between being welcomed somewhere, expecting to inherit it, and actually possessing a legally recognized right to determine its future. So did Prince William really uncover a forgotten 1999 clause that prevented Camilla's family from inheriting a vast royal estate before ultimately redirecting its future toward Prince Edward and charitable causes? Based solely on the supplied material, those extraordinary events and documents remain unverified rather than established royal facts. But the story raises a fascinating question. When private promises conflict with written inheritance rules, which should carry greater weight? Tell us what you think in the comments. If you enjoy carefully framed royal family stories, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for our next discussion.